morning. Mhm. Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Oh, yeah. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Oh, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that everybody has had a great and wonderful day thus far. If you are with us for the first time, today is Teachable Tuesday, where we focus on history. And right now, we are on immigration history and we are on Black history. We started by talking about racist ideas, and we are currently in this book. We are going to continue this book into season 4, Lord willing, season 4. It's huge, as you can see. So we'll probably spend a lot of time in here on season 4. The book is called Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, and it is the definitive history of racist ideas in keyword America. All right. So it's tracing where America got its racist ideas from, and how they brought it to the Americas, and how those ideas have expanded, been preserved over time, etc., etc. So this is what we'll be reading from on Tuesdays for the rest of this season and into season 4. All right. We are also today back in Dr. Claude Anderson's book, A Black History Reader. If you're going to order the book, I do recommend that you try to order it through his site. He is one of the only institutes here in the Washington, D.C. area that focuses specifically on the issues of Black people. So we want to make sure we are supporting him and his work that he's been doing probably almost 40 years now. And his institute is called the Harvest Institute. So please, if you're going to get his work, try to support him directly. All right. We're going to be looking at question 3 in his book, and his question is, how has social integration failed Black America? All right. And where we'll be beginning today is we're continuing our conversation on the history of immigration from This Land is Our Land. As we see, there is a lot of things going on right now in terms of immigration. There are some interestingly held beliefs about what's happening right now, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I do want us to focus on the history of immigration, because if you've been reading along with us, you know that some of the posturing that is going on now has always been around. Some of these ideas that people are spouting about immigration has been there from the beginning. So if you've been paying attention on Tuesdays to our reading, some of the things that are being said currently should not surprise you, all right? Because they've been saying them since the early 1900s about people coming into this country. We just have a new generation of racists that are rehearsing some of the same reasoning that their ancestors rehearsed for not allowing people to come into the country. Some of the laws that we see changing to allow greater numbers of European ancestors to come in and limit people of color from coming in All of that has a historical base. So none of this should surprise Daring Dialogues listeners, because we've been talking about it, all right, before it has ratcheted up to where it currently is. I want to talk really briefly about the necessity of voting. If you are in a state right now that has several offices up for voting, believe it or not, there's a lot of summer voting going on right now. I know for Maryland, we have several elections, local elections, elections to decide a U.S. senator. We have congressional races, legislative races, county races, judge of the circuit court races, people who hold local offices, sheriff's offices, etc. All of that, we have that coming up. And ours actually started last week with early voting into this week, Thursday. I'm actually going today to do my early voting. I want to encourage you, if your community has something that, like what my community put out, I'll show it to you. My community puts out a voter's guide. All right. Usually you can find these at your local library. Usually your local library can sometimes carry voters' guides to let you know what is happening in the races, like who's up for what, who's going unopposed. And then I like this particular guide because they tell you who the person is. They tell you the duties of that office. They tell you the salary. They tell you the term limits. And then they ask each candidate to answer some questions. And this is where you really get an idea of who is on the ticket running, because these are their own words. And so, for example, as I was reading through yesterday, it took me about 2 hours to go through this whole guide because I was reading the position and point of every candidate on my ballot. Maryland is a closed primary state, meaning that you can only vote based on your party affiliation. You can only vote for those candidates in that party affiliation. And so I'm going through and I'm reading, and what they have down here is they're asking each candidate how do they feel on the following. For example, if you're trying to run for something in finance, they're asking them, how do you feel about the budget? What do you believe about budgeting? What do you believe about redistricting? What do you believe about the environment? What do you believe about discrimination? The further up you go, especially to the senator seats in the congressional, like the legislative seats, they start asking more pertinent questions like, what do you believe about health care? This is something that you need to pay attention to with your elected officials. You need to know what they believe about health care. What do you believe about discrimination? What do you believe about the current economic policy? And what do you believe about immigration? So I went through and I started reading specifically what these people believe about discrimination and immigration. And some of these are some straight out racists that are running. And so this is why I'm encouraging people. I know people say, well, what does it matter about my vote? Let me tell you, it matters. Okay, especially on the local level. It matters who you put in office. All right. So when you look at things like what's happening to your schools in your communities, when you look at what's happening with the budget in your community, and why your why your schools may not be getting the funding that other schools are getting, this is where you need to pay attention to what people believe. All right. Here's one. I said, this guy is a definite red flag. He is running for Congressional District 2 in Maryland. His name is Mitchell Tolan Jr. This is what Mitchell has to say about discrimination. Okay. He says, there are already countless laws on the books regarding this issue. However, contrary to popular opinion, I believe this has resulted in more tension between various groups of people and is the antithesis of a free society. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? He says there's enough things on the books concerning protecting the rights of minorities in this country. If you're a minority in this country, you actually know that's absolutely not true. Then he says, I personally am opposed to all forms of discrimination against any and all parties, but there's that word. I do not believe individuals should be forced to interact with anyone on private property. So basically, as long as you're on private property, you can discriminate. It's a no, okay? We will not be voting for him. I would not encourage anybody to vote for him. Okay, here's another one. This is a legislative candidate. They asked her, what do you think about redistricting, environment, discrimination, and education? She says this about discrimination. She says, no one should be discriminated against for any reason, period. But, there's that word, we already have enough laws and regulations in place to protect minorities. Again, this is somebody who does not understand that our civil rights are currently being rolled back right now. It's a no. But she also goes on to say this. What has not gotten attention is reverse discrimination. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination, people. It's a term that people make up to not deal with actual discrimination against minorities. Okay? So she says, reverse discrimination has not gotten enough attention. It's a no. But my favorite, let me see if I can find that one. This guy, he was like, wow. Let me see. I think this is it. Oh no, his is not in here. Anyway, this particular gentleman is running as a sheriff's candidate. It says no response received by deadline. So there's no response. He doesn't have any response to any of these questions in this magazine. So I went to look at his website. On his website, he doesn't respond to anything. So I found him online. I went to Facebook and I typed in his name and I typed in for sheriff and it pulled up his personal Facebook page. Hint, hint. If you're going to run for a campaign, you might want to deal with your personal Facebook page. So on his first personal Facebook page, he has things like, the Muslims are taking over the world. Good morning. The Muslims are taking over the world. Then he has another post up about Mexicans and no sanctuary, and they're all coming over as rapists. So that tells me that if he were elected to be sheriff in my town, he would be targeting Muslims, of which there are plenty here, and Mexicans. All right? So it's a no. But what am I saying? I am saying that you need to look into who is running to be seated in positions of authority in your community. You cannot leave these elections up to chance. You just cannot. All right? So make sure you're going in and paying attention, not just to the names on your ballot, but actually going and seeing who these people are that are running to hold elected positions. And some of these positions, some of these terms are more than 4 years long. Our county seats, some of the positions are 15 years long. So that means almost 2 decades of a person being in position to enact racist policies in your community. All right. So you need to pay attention, do the research. It may take you a couple of hours to read through candidate positions, but it is worth doing because you don't want somebody elected that is going to be harmful for your community, for your life, for your children's lives. 15 years, if you got young children, that's their entire life in a public school. So yes, I would want to know what the people who want to be over the budget for schools, I would want to know what they feel and what they believe about minorities. I would want to know what they feel and what they believe about budget spending in schools. I would want to know if they're going to allow crazy curriculums to be put into the public school that's going to put my child in at a disadvantage. I would want to know how they feel about standardized testing. I would want to know how they feel about Common Core. I would want to know how they feel about class size. Do they believe that teachers should have assistants in the classroom and that they should be paid for by the county? All right. So those are some things that hopefully I'm sharing today that will get you thinking about your candidates. Check when your local elections are. Check when your early voting starts, and make sure you get in there and vote local. I know a lot of people get excited every 4 years about voting in the presidential election, but it's the local people that you put in that will directly affect the quality of life in your neighborhood. All right? All right. So let us continue. Let's see. We last stopped at talking about refugees. We are now moving on to chapter 6. In This Land Is Our Land. This land is whose land? From World War II into the 21st century. From World War II into the 21st century. I didn't want to stay in one place. It was always my desire for adventure, and the place I really wanted to visit was the United States. There is so much opportunity with all the modern facilities and technology, explained Perla Rigor, who came to the United States from the Philippines as part of an exchange program for international study begun in 1948 with the Information and Educational Exchange Act. Already a registered nurse, she worked in American hospitals and stayed in this country for the rest of her life. It was a rough time for me when I started here, she said, because being from a foreign land, you have to push yourself to get your ability recognized. By 1975, she had earned degrees in psychology and education. To me, success is not measured by the position the person has reached in their life, but by the obstacles he or she has overcome. During World War II, American policies and attitudes about refugees began to change. Laws regarding refugees continued to be modified in the 21st century. In this same period, from about 1940 all the way through 2015, laws concerning other kinds of immigrants have also changed. Since China was an American ally during World War II, as early as 1943, Congress, listen, repealed all Chinese exclusion laws. So when people say, well, it's just the law, there's nothing we can do about it, it's a flat out lie. All right? I want us to understand that, because the current administration and the people who support it, all right, they love to say, well, it's just the law. They need to obey the law. Listen, when China became an ally of the United States, they chose to repeal all laws that excluded Chinese people from coming to this country. All right? So it's possible for them to change laws. The question is, do they want to? The law also stated that Chinese, but not other Asian peoples, could become American citizens. Again, a law can either be just or unjust. I'm quite sure the other Asians felt that that was discriminatory towards them. I'm quite sure they were like, hey, wait a minute. How come the Chinese can become citizens, but we can't? All right. So this is things that we have done in the past. In 1946, when the Philippines became independent, Filipinos were allowed to become American citizens too, as were people born in India. The annual immigration quota for Chinese was set at only 105 people. However, it was set at 100 for Filipinos. All right? So it's not like something's coming down on top of America saying you can't let these people in, you can let these people in. No. They are creating the laws. They are creating the quotas. They are establishing the limits. The small quotas for Asian groups indicated that racism was still a factor in immigration policy, and racism is still a factor in immigration policy. So we don't need to hide behind, well, it's just policy, because racism is spelled what? Policy. I can decide who I want in, and I can create a law around that. But allowing Asians to become citizens meant that they could bring in family members outside the quota system. And educational/work exchanges like the one that brought Perla Rigor from the Philippines provided another path to becoming an American without being counted in national quotas. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, Americans were again debating who should be allowed to immigrate to the United States. I believe that this nation is the last hope of Western civilization. And if this oasis of the world shall be overrun, perverted, contaminated, or destroyed, sounds like similar language we hear today, then the last flickering light of humanity will be extinguished, proclaimed Senator Patrick McCarran of Nevada. I take no issue with those who would praise the contributions which have been made to our society by people of many races, varied creeds, and colors. However, we have in the United States today hardcore, indigestible blocks which have not become integrated into the American way of life, but which, on the contrary, are its deadly enemies. Today, as never before, untold millions are storming our gates for admission, and those gates are cracking under the strain. This was said in 1952. I want you to think about that. 1952, they felt this way. 2018, they still feel this way. All right? So the decades have not changed their mind that this is how they feel about people coming to this country. In 1952, the McCarran-Walter Act temporarily settled the debate in favor of keeping the national quotas. President Harry Truman vetoed the act, saying the basis of this quota system was false and unworthy in 1924. It is even worse now. At the present time, this quota system keeps out the very people we want to bring in. It is incredible to me that in this year of 1952, we should again be enacting into law such a slur on the patriotism, the capacity, and the decency of a large part of our citizenry. Congress overrode his veto. So when people say, make America great again, harkens back to the 1950s, this is what they speak of. All right? So they created this act that established these quotas. The president vetoed it. The Congress came back and overrode the president. The law made some small changes to the 1924 quotas. It based quota numbers on the 1920 census. Great Britain, Germany, and the Republic of Ireland received 2/3 of the quota slots. So don't tell me that the quota system does not favor some countries over others. It does. Each country in Asia had a quota of 100 people per year, and no more than 2,000 immigrants from all of Asia could come each year. It also placed quotas on the number of immigrants from European colonies in the Western Hemisphere, mostly in the Caribbean. So where are my brothers from the Caribbean, and why isn't the United States overflowing with Caribbean people? Ah? Because Jamaica, Barbados were still colonies of Great Britain. Other countries in the Western Hemisphere, such as Mexico, continue to have no quotas. And now all of a sudden, we want to act like Mexico is the scourge of the world, and we want to act like Mexico had quotas. Up to 50% of each quota was saved for highly skilled immigrants and their families. The law also favored parents, husbands or wives, and children of American citizens. The well-known chef Jacques Pepin immigrated to the United States when he was 23 under this quota system. By 1959, I wanted to come to America. Everyone wanted to come to America. They accepted only so many immigrants from different countries each year, and the quota for France was never filled, as opposed to, say, Italy, where there was a huge waiting list going back 8 years before you could come to the United States with an immigrant visa. But France, no. I had my green card in 3 months. I came here on the 10th of September in 1959, and a couple of days later, I was working at Le Pavillon, which was the best restaurant in the country at the time. Pepin added, I would never move back to France because I'm much more American than French now. After 50 years here, I've become totally American. What does it mean to become American? Remember, the original definition of becoming American had to do with whiteness. But the McCarran-Walter Act also did something that would dramatically change immigration. It took away the barriers for Asians to become citizens of the United States. Americans at the time did not think that this would have much impact on our country. The quota numbers for Asian countries were relatively small. But as Asians already living in the United States became citizens, they could then begin to bring in their husbands, their wives, their children outside of the actual quota numbers. All right? Laws don't always have the consequences that Congress intends. We know. They also don't reflect the actual number of immigrants that come into the country each year. The 1952 immigration law was in effect for 13 years. The quota provided for about 2 million immigrants in this period. In fact, some 3.5 million people immigrated legally to the United States, including Latinos, Canadians, refugees, and immediate family not affected by the law. By 1953, 8,000 Asian immigrants entered. By 1965, the total number of Asian immigrants was 236,000. So they were using their citizenship as a pathway to get their other relatives over to the United States. Diana Yu was 21 when she immigrated from Korea to attend college in Alabama. She raised her 3 daughters while attending graduate school in the United States. In America, I learned to do things myself, solve my own problems instead of expecting someone else to solve it for me. I owe a lot. It has been my training ground. This country has taught me some of the most important lessons in life. Moreover, I like living in a multicultural, multiracial society. Now, understand, all of this opportunity is happening for immigrant peoples coming to the United States, while at the same time denying opportunity to the descendants of slaves who have been here. I want to make that clear. So when people say, I don't understand why Black Americans are so far behind. You have to understand, at the same time, America was opening its doors as the land of opportunity. It was also stepping on other people who had already been here and denying them opportunity, land, resources, jobs, etc. All right? Which is why, if you think about it, which is why there's such a skewed viewpoint of how some people see this country. Because if you came over as an immigrant, your family did get opportunity. Your family did get the opportunity to get jobs. They might have received levels of discrimination for being a foreigner, but they did get opportunity. They were able to come over and become a part of society and become, as some of them have already said, fully American. Now, I want you to be on the other side of that, be a descendant of the enslaved, and you're seeing other people come in from other countries and get opportunities that your family has yet to receive. Because we're talking about 1950s. All right? This is before the civil rights movement. This is Jim Crow still being in full swing. And people, I can obviously see now why people would all of a sudden say, you know what? Enough is enough. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Once some of the racial barriers for Asians had been removed, many immigrants from China and Korea came to attend American colleges in the 1950s and 60s. They were attending American colleges. Our ancestors and relatives were in either Black formed colleges, because they weren't in white American colleges. Let's be clear. All right? So, again, educational opportunities were opening up for immigrants. They were still being blocked for the descendants of slaves. They were highly educated and skilled. What does that mean? So again, when people talk about economic opportunity, economic advantages, you cannot compare disenfranchised descendants of slaves with highly educated and skilled foreigners coming over. Apples and oranges. By 2010, Asians were immigrating to the United States in higher numbers than Hispanics who entered legally. In 2013, Asian Americans were the fastest growing group descended from immigrants in the United States. Although racial barriers persisted, by the early 1960s, the modern civil rights movement to gain equal treatment for African Americans was underway. Why was it underway? Why did it become such an impetus then? Well, if you're looking at opportunity being given to other people that are coming in from other places, and you're still at, as Dr. Claude Anderson said, you're still at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, and people are not coming in at the bottom. They're coming in maybe mid-level and climbing their way to the top, and then have the nerve to look down at you and say, why aren't you up here with us? All right, that's what's happening. Many Americans were embarrassed by the difference between our ideals as a free country and the reality of segregation. This was going on at the same time. So you have people who are coming to this country, they're getting opportunity, they're getting jobs, they're coming in and doing higher education, all right? But you see segregation happening at the same time. And I'm gonna be honest with you, this is why a lot of African Americans right now are reluctant to join other people's fight. Because they're saying, look, when our relatives, when our ancestors were fighting for equal rights in this country, where were you? Did you look around and see what was happening and say, that's not my fight? Were you simply just grateful to be in the country so you didn't stand up or you didn't speak up for the rights of African Americans? And now you see some of the same things beginning to happen to your people group, and you want all of the black people to jump on the bandwagon and fight your fight. And black people are looking around like, I'm trying to remember when you came to help us. Fight our fight. Okay? But the reality is, as one of my Facebook friends pointed out, is the reality is it is everybody's fight. How much you want to involve yourself and how much you want to engage yourself in it, that becomes the issue. But it is everybody's fight. Because if they will do it to you, if they will do it to immigrants, they will do it to you. Let's be clear. To some people, we're all black and we're all brown. They don't point out ethnicities. All they see is black and brown people taking over, and it poses a threat to them. All right? So, this was true of immigration laws too. Americans realized that setting different limits for immigrants coming from different countries, usually favoring people from Western and Northern Europe, was a form of discrimination. Now, we have a group of people that are trying to justify this form of discrimination. Large majorities in both houses of Congress passed the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, the Hart-Celler Act. It was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson at the Statue of Liberty. The law eliminated all national quotas from then on. It would not matter what country a potential immigrant came from. But the 1965 law did set quotas for the Eastern and Western hemispheres. The Eastern Hemisphere, which includes Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia, its quota was set at 170,000 immigrants a year. The Western Hemisphere, including North, Central, and South America, as well as the Caribbean, had a quota of 120,000 a year. This was the first time a limit had been set on immigrants from the Americas. In 1976, the hemisphere quotas were eliminated. 290,000 immigrants from anywhere in the world could enter the United States each year. Race and employment, however, were still two big fears. To pass the law, supporters had to convince Americans that it would not change the ethnic character of the United States or overwhelm America with immigrants. So much for the idea of a melting pot, because these people were still talking about, we do not want the ethnic character of the United States changed. However, I guess they forgot that they too changed the ethnic character of the United States when they murdered most of the indigenous people that lived in the United States. They too changed the ethnic character of the United States. So we're going to stop there for today. We will come back next Wednesday and see what happened with race and employment. So now we know that the big deal is that the ethnic character of the United States is changing. That's what they did not want to happen. All right? And anybody who is honest knows that that's what the problem is. You're changing the ethnic character of the United States, and people do not like it. All right? Some black people don't like it, and a lot of white people don't like it. But the reality is, America has already been down this road again, down this road of arguments. So those people acting like this is a new argument for this country, it's not. You just need to get a history book like we're doing, and study and read on the history of immigration in the United States, and you will see this is not a new argument. All right? A Black history reader, Dr. Claude Anderson, asked the question, how has social integration failed Black America? Because remember, this is another grievance that many people have with how the civil rights movement went down. For them, the civil rights movement won us some legislative gains, which are now being ripped apart, by the way. They're being rolled back. Civil rights are being rolled back. They are. But one of the issues has been we got integrated socially into America, meaning we started living more like Americans. We were integrated socially, meaning we could come into their spaces now. We could sit at the counter. We could go to the theater. We can go to school with them. All of that is considered social integration. But economic justice has yet to occur. All right. So his question is, how has social integration failed Black America? This is Dr. Claude Anderson's perspective that we're reading. He says, social integration was posited to eradicate institutional racism and remedy the negative socioeconomic impact of centuries of slavery and Jim Crow segregation, but it failed. As a result, Black Americans remain burdened by the economic, social, and pathological impacts that resulted from their historical maltreatment. In his book, The Tragic Failure of Integration, author Tom Wicker concludes that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream had turned into a Black nightmare, and that the successes of the movement failed to translate into full integration or first-class citizenship for most Black people. Nearly 60 years after the Black Civil Rights Movement was hijacked by newly created or fabricated minorities, a growing number of Black Americans are reaching the same conclusion. They are still the out group of American society. They are learning the lesson that Jewish people in Europe learned in the 1500s when they tried to integrate into mainstream society. Jews were a hated out group. They quickly learned that to protect their group, it was better to circle the wagons than divide and scatter themselves into the larger population, making them weaker and more vulnerable. This is a lesson yet to be learned by Black Americans. After 50 years of marching and singing, "We Shall Overcome Someday," they are still fixed at the bottom of American society, buried beneath an unrelenting flow of immigrants and more economically dependent than they were in the 1960s when social integration began. Because in the beginning, in the 1960s, Black communities were together. Families were together. Fathers were in the home. Businesses were in the Black community because you couldn't go anywhere else because nobody would sell you anything. So you had to depend on the Black dry cleaner, the Black-owned restaurants, the Black hotels, the Black buses. There were Black travel bus lines. Dr. Claude Anderson's family owned one of them. You had to depend on your community because no one else was going to help you. No one else was going to allow you into their establishment. No one else was going to serve you. All right? For the most part. So because we had solid business, Black business communities, we weren't starved to death or shut out. We had our own. In the current society in which we live, most Black communities could probably be starved to death in about 2 weeks. And that's reality. Why? We don't own the gas stations. So if you're out of gas, guess what? You won't be able to travel. You don't own the gas stations. Most urban environments don't have gardens. So you're not growing your own food. Most of urban environments, the grocery stores, and even the corner stores are owned by other people. So if the United States said, hey, we're going to crack down on Black Americans, if you are an immigrant in this country, in order to maintain your citizenship status, we want you to deny Black Americans the right to your business. That would shut down most urban Black neighborhoods. I want us to think. That's all. So when we talk about the importance of establishing Black businesses, this is why we're talking about the importance of establishing Black-owned businesses. And not just Black businesses that sell things that you cannot eat. Can I say that again? All right. We also need to establish Black businesses that deal with our main natural resources that we need in order to live. Food, water. Matter of fact, there's a new Black business. I think I shared it on Daring Dialogues that started a water bottling company. That's important. So he's talking about the fact that Jewish people learned to come together, create their own communities to strengthen themselves so that they would not be weak and vulnerable. The integration process made Blacks unwanted guests in what whites and their sub-ethnic groups owned and controlled. Blacks still own and control less than 1% of anything of value, but bear 6 to 8 times of everything that is bad or negative. A few Black people have become visible as public officials, athletes, entertainers, media personalities, but there is little connection between their elevated public image and the low socioeconomic status of the Black masses. Younger Blacks are just now beginning to grasp the weight of the losses of Black community, losses of our schools, businesses, culture, history, leaders, sports teams, music, and exceptionality in mainstream society. They have never had the positive experiences of living in an actual Black community. I lived in a Black community. Yes, there was the war on drugs in my community down in Miami and South Florida. Yes, we had the war on drugs, but we also had, for the drug dealers we didn't have very many of them, but I saw Black businesses on every corner. I grew up in a real Black community where the Black people owned the corner stores, the laundromats, the nightclubs, etc., etc. I grew up in a Black community where you can go to the corner store and maybe your parents didn't have the full total, and the business owner said, we'll just put a tab and they can come and square up on their tab next week. All right. So there were positive experiences of living in a Black community. You get to see the good and you get to see the bad. It is increasingly difficult for Blacks to become a functional part of American society without physical communities or a broad sense of community. The years between 1960 and 2014 could have produced a more self-sufficient Black people if the civil rights movement had worked to address and correct the maldistribution of wealth, income, and resources that occurred because of 500 years of Jim Crow and semi-slavery. While Blacks were chasing the elusive social integration dream, the horrors inflicted on Blacks receded from the consciousness of society. And blacks people, many of them lost their moral and political leverage. Black people were displaced in the nation's conscience by immigrants in general and Hispanics in particular, who publicly boast of their successful efforts to totally displace black people in every aspect of American society. In his book, Presumed Alliance, the unspoken conflict between blacks and Latinos and what it means for America, the author, Nicholas Vaca, disdained a rainbow coalition and presumed alliances with black Americans. He said that Hispanics were no longer interested in being classified as white, because many of them are, that they wanted to be viewed as a minority who could then compete with blacks for political and economic power. Even though Hispanics from the Caribbean islands and the Americans were the descendants of the slaveholders and had never been enslaved or Jim Crowed, they felt that by the mere fact that they were more socially acceptable than blacks in American society, that they could gain socioeconomic benefits and become the nation's majority minority population, which they are currently. Their goal, according to Vaca, was to displace blacks in every way possible. As an official outgroup and primary target of conservative hate groups, there are neither rewards nor incentives for immigrants, women, LGBT, or poor whites to identify publicly with Black America. This nation's policy of political correctness allows all of these groups, all of them, yes, all of them, immigrant, women, LGBT, poor whites, all of those minority groups identify and rank higher than Black people in the nation's order of social acceptability. How do we know this? Ask a Black gay man. He's probably the highest ranking of social acceptability. All right? The majority of immigrants are classified as white. They get double benefits when they are also classified as an aggrieved minority and compete against blacks for public recognition and financial resources. Integration did not produce racial or economic equality for Black people because it was a sentiment, he writes. It was not a doctrinal commitment by white society. The dream of Dr. King and liberals of a colorblind society took the nation's focus off of Black people and gave the illusion of integration and equality. It destroyed the Black unity that was forced on them by segregation. By 1960s, convinced to believe in social integration because we thought, hey, if we integrate, we'll be able to take our skills, take our business sense, excel educationally, and begin to move into society, right? By the 1960s, we had given up our communities. Many Black people gave up their businesses to integrate. The jobs that those businesses created, we gave up sports teams, schools, professionals, and culture. By the 1970s, the immigrant groups pouring into the country created cohesive ethnic communities of their own, often in the same physical locations that Black people were beginning to vacate. Integration was a failure for Native Black Americans because they did not fully understand or appreciate the communities that they so eagerly abandoned. So you abandon your communities to become quote unquote integrated. And as we see, people are telling us loud and clear. Let's go down the list of how we're being shown loud and clear that we don't want you here. All right? Let's see. Places that people have called 911. All right? So this is just the beginning of people showing you that they don't want you integrated with them. Somebody give me a list, because I know there's a couple. I'm probably going to miss some. All right? Let's see. The recent one was swimming while Black. Swimming while black. The man went to the mother and the child and basically asked, "Did you take a bath before you got into the pool? Because we don't want diseases being spread in the pool." Barbecuing while black. Thank you. Golfing while black. Definitely eating while black. We'll just put eating, okay? Because you got Waffle House. Waffle House has been added several times. Shopping while black. All right. What are people saying? Sleeping, thank you. Sleeping while black in the dorm. All right. So what are they trying to say without saying it? The point that's being made is we're going back to a time where people want to segregate black people out in a very specifically distinct way. Oh yeah. The guy moving into his apartment while black. He got called the police on. He used to work for the Obama administration. This was in New York. All right. So what are they telling us? They're telling you in no uncertain terms that we don't want you around. That's what they're telling you. And some people are like, I have a right to be wherever I want to be. Listen, while you saying you have a right to be wherever you want to be, I suggest you start creating spaces where you don't have to say that. Create some spaces where you don't have to say that. Can I say it one more time? While you're fighting people about whether or not they want you around, please make sure that you are beginning to create spaces where you don't have to say that. Create businesses where you don't have to say that. Because I don't see other groups begging white people to let them in. Somebody's going to be upset, but the reality is the reality. Okay? It's time out for begging. It's time out for it's a famous song that the people sing, and it says, "I can't make you love me if you don't." That's where I'm at. I can't make you love me if you don't, but I can sure prepare myself and create spaces for myself and for people who look like me that have been turned away from other places. I can be the answer. I can be the option. Okay? Just like with the girl with the swimming, and everybody was upset with the hotel and all that. Yeah, be upset with the hotel, call, make your complaints, etc. But at the same time, there are black-owned hotels. There are black-owned bed and breakfasts that we can be supporting. So this summer, when you do your travels, look up some black-owned spaces, hotels, restaurants. You know you're going to be driving across country. You can do that now. You can be looking for those black-owned businesses so that when you go to wherever you're driving this summer, you can actually support places that will welcome you. All right? So, I didn't get to stamp from the beginning today. I apologize. Hopefully we will get to it next week. I'll start with stamp from the beginning next week. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host today. I hope that I have said something that will get you thinking both about immigration and also about integration. All right? What do you do when your country turns on you? It has done it before. The question is, what do we do now? What do we do with a new generation of people who is shocked that our country is turning on us? I'm not shocked. But you know why I'm not shocked? Because I had ancestors who told me our story. And that's a whole other broadcast. So, I thank you for your time and attention. I want you to remember that light is the most daring opposition to darkness. Please go out and be light today. Don't forget, yesterday you're supposed to treat your Nathan. Today, if you're out shopping, try to find a place, even online, you want to get something new, try to find a black business to support. Here's a great website to go to for those shoppers today. And that website is WeBuyBlack.com. WeBuyBlack.com. It is a marketplace of black-owned businesses online, and they sell all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of businesses that you can look at there and support. I want to thank you again for your time and attention. Take care, and God bless. And thank you, Lady Judy, for being on today. Take care, and God bless.